Children are dismissed. Thank you guys so much for being here. And, you know, today's going to be a little bit different, which, as you can tell, Fred did the children's message, which I thank him because I figured you guys are going to get sick of looking at me for being up here so much because I'll be preaching this month because Bill is gone on his sabbatical. And since Bill's not here, well, as the saying goes, while the cat's away, the mice will play, and I'm as mousy as it gets. So, to add to that today, we're going to be hearing from someone from FCA, and so we support a lot of different ministries here at this church, and we're trying to do a better job of making sure that people from these ministries are just kind of keeping us updated, and so you guys know the involvement that you have and what you're having an effect on in this community. And so I'm going to be inviting Julie Greif to come on up. She's a teacher from San Antonio, and she joins us here today. She's been active in FCA for about 10 years, is what she was telling me, and that she's going to be coming and kind of sharing with you some of her experience with FCA, which, if you don't know, is Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And so, Julie, come on up, and I hope you will give her the better attention that you give me when I do announcements.
Good morning. Okay, if he thinks he's mousy, then you guys are in for a surprise. I've known about this for about a month, and yeah, that's when Matt and I started talking. And I only started praying to God this morning, what do you want me to say? And so when I walked in here, I was like, I'm supposed to talk about this, right? But no, it's really easy for me to talk about FCA, and actually, the real people that I'm going to talk and tell you about today, first is Jesus, but second is Pat and Kim Ford. They're right up here, so if you can give them a round of applause. Not actually me, but they were my FCA directors in college. And so I'm just going to take you back on a trip to Julia in college when I was a soccer player. I probably don't look like one anymore, but my knees do. When I transferred, I see you back there. I transferred to a school up in far West Texas A&M. I grew up in San Antonio. And so when I got to West Texas, I was shocked at nothing because there is nothing up there. And so, yeah, it was an experience for me coming from San Antonio to see cows on the right and cows on the left, and that was about all we had. And so I was really excited to play soccer there. I transferred from a different school, and my very first practice at West Texas A&M, I tore my left ACL. And so I spent about that whole year rehabbing and recovering, came back for the second season, played 10 games, and tore my right ACL. And so that was a season-ending injury. I broke 2 bones, and I tore 5 ligaments, and it was really devastating for me because up until that point, I didn't know Jesus, and I was a soccer player. That was my identity. I had soccer, and that's it. If you remove soccer, I did not know who Julia was. And so I do remember meeting Pat and Kim. I always joke that they stalked us at games, but I'll use a better word. But they did come to every single one of our games, and I always look forward to seeing them because, well, not so much Pat, but Kim was a very friendly face. No, I'm just kidding. No, they were very friendly and they were very loving, and I remember always at the end of every game, they would come and they would give us a hug, and whether I was playing or whether I was sidelined, I still got the same hug, and I still got the same love. And to understand why that meant so much, I need to take you back another 10 years to Julia's small little childhood. I only have 7 minutes, and probably now 5, so I'm going to hurry it up. But I just want to take you back to how I grew up. I grew up with an alcoholic parent in a pretty abusive household, and so when I was about 15, I made the decision that I was going to get as far away from home as possible. That's all I wanted to do was just leave, and I didn't want to go back. I did not want to go back to San Antonio. Ironically, I ended up there. And so I did what I said. I got the scholarship. I went as far away as possible. But I just was missing a vital piece in my life. Obviously, I was missing Jesus. And more so, I was missing that kind of love that Jesus gives. It's something that all of us should understand, but it's a balm to our soul. And I think seeing them and starting to enter into FCA in college, I was starting to realize the love that Jesus had for me. And so when I tell this story and then they're sitting in front of me, it makes it better. And so, yeah, they really kind of were like the first line of defense to showing me a little bit more about Jesus's love. And I'm sure they didn't know my full story in college, but they started to get to know me. And I was a pretty harsh person. She probably won't say that, but I do think I had much of a harsh exterior. But through FCA in college, I was able just to learn for the first time about Jesus' love. I was able to get a basis of, I wasn't just Julia, the soccer player. I was Julia, the child of God. I was Julia, the daughter of a king. There's so many other things. And they had speakers that would come in and tell us about the love of Christ. And so I can't really say that like since FCA to now, it was a perfect walk. But that specific love that they showed me that I know came from God propelled me into the future. And so then you flash forward again 10 years, and here I stand before you, actually more than 10 years now, probably. But that love brought me on the mission field for 5 years to South Africa and all over Southern Africa, and I was able to share about the love of Christ. I just moved back to San Antonio last year. But that same love that was shown to me in FCA also brought me through a very life-changing stomach surgery in 2020, where that's the reason I had to move back to the United States, and also just through this first year of teaching. Do I have any teachers out here? Anybody? Oh my gosh, how do you do it? That was the craziest year I've ever had. So very different than African children. But when I look back to it all, really that base of love that I was introduced to in FCA kind of propelled me. And so when I asked God this morning driving here, I was like, so what do you want me to say today? He just gently said to me, my love will bring you farther than any ability you ever have. And I think that's true for like anything. Like I had the ability to play soccer, but his love propelled me further. I was able to go to Africa. And now I don't even know how many people have heard the message of Jesus Christ just because somebody else chose to love me. And through that, Jesus chose to love me. So I was reading this morning in 1 John 4:12, and it talks about, no one's ever seen God, but we know the love of God through every single one of us. And then that love makes us perfect. And so that's really the only message I have today, and I know that Matt is going to talk more about FCA, probably more of the history and all the fun stuff. But I just get to tell you a little bit about how I got connected and what it did in my life that brought me to be able to stand here in front of you today. So thank you. Is that 7 minutes?
All right. Thank you very much, Julie. And so she alludes to a couple of different things. One I'll get to later, one I'll get to now, of just the impact that FCA has in this community, and that ties in well with the message today. But before I get into that, let us pray. Lord Father, we thank you so much for this great and wonderful day. We thank you so much that no matter what goes on in our everyday lives, you are there. In the hard times and the good times, Lord, you are there. And so, Father, we pray that you would be with us now. Open up our hearts, minds, and ears to what you have to say, and we praise you, Father. And Lord, we want to know, how do we affect our community? So again, amen. So real quick, because I forgot this last week, I really want to make sure I didn't do it this week. Thank you so much, guests and visitors. Make sure you fill out your yellow card, turn that on in, and we're glad that you're here. It is always great having people here, and I see a lot of very familiar faces, and I see some guests, and we just want to say thank you in joining us today to be a part of this family. And so last week, we talked about changing our country, right? Because, well, let's face it, our country is broken, divided, messed up, screwed up, all sorts of wrong, and is not heading the right direction. That's my very short synopsis of last week. But we also learned that there's hope. We learned that there's something that we can do, and we talked about King Josiah as a child and how he changed his country and how he was able to get things back on track for the Lord and for Israel. But we also learned that we couldn't do it exactly the same way. And so we talked about to change our country, we're going through this sermon series. And today we get to see the next step. Our next step, I would argue, before we change our country, we need to change our community. So what am I talking about? Well, I'm going to use the story of FCA as an example. FCA was founded in 1954 by Eastern Oklahoma A&M basketball coach Don McClannon, who later resigned to become its full-time director. After watching sports stars use fame to endorse and sell general merchandise, McClannon wrote to 19 prominent sports figures asking for their help to establish this organization and to use that same idea, that same method of promoting Jesus and encouraging those to know about God. Among the first supporters were Baseball Hall of Famer Branch Rickey, who was most known for breaking the MLB color barrier by signing Jackie Robinson, to the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1945, and professional athletes including Otto Graham, Carl Erskine, and Don Muma. FCA held its first advisory board in September of 1954, and that November, FCA will be born. Fellowship of Christian Athletes is touching millions of lives, one heart at a time, since 1954, yeah. FCA had a vision, and it started with Don. Don had a vision for people to know about Christ, and he wanted people, particularly coaches and athletes. That's FCA's main target. They're not limited to that, but that's an area, that's community that they can reach out to. FCA has been challenging coaches and athletes and professional athletes, college athletes, high school athletes, junior high athletes, young children. And their goal is to reach athletes and coaches through the commonality of sport and introducing Christ within that realm. Their vision is to see the world transformed by Jesus Christ through the influence of coaches and athletes. And their mission is to lead every coach and every athlete to know Christ. This program, this ministry gets started by one guy who saw within an athletic realm, in an athletic community, there's something I can do. And he did it well. We heard today from Julia on how she doesn't know Don, I'm pretty sure. I did not do my research. I don't even know if he's alive. But we know that Julia had an effect through FCA. Pat and Kim Ford lead the Texas State FCA here at some point, I'm going to learn how to speak. I should probably do that before I preach. But at Texas State, they have been leading that for the last few years, and I've known Pat for about 7 years now? 6.5, man. And so sports is an easy one for me. I love sports. I've been involved in sports almost all of my life. And for me, sharing Christ in sports is like breathing. It's natural, it's easy, and that is a community that I relate very well with. In fact, some of you have been here long enough to know that I'm banned from talking about sports or using sports analogies in my sermons because all I would ever do is use those. Well, like I said earlier, the cat's away and I'm going to play, so technically I'm breaking the ban. I hope you don't rat me out, but that's okay if you do. But so today, I wanted to focus in on how do we affect our communities. Our communities could be the people we work with. You have a work community. You have the community of your town that you live in. You have a community of a type of people that you get along with. In this case, I'm using FCA or athletes. There are different types of communities. But my question to you is, how do we change our communities? In that process, do we have any biblical examples? Do we have any idea of how communities have an effect on people? Well, you learned a lot last week about how Israel and how they would love the Lord and find something shiny and come back to the Lord. And you see a little bit of that again today. And one of the reasons why they struggled was because of the communities around them. You see, God, when he set up Israel, was to be a nation set apart for the Lord. They were supposed to be an example. And yet, time and time again, Israel would get distracted and would want to be like everybody else. So let's look at Israel a little bit and see some of what happened. Well, as early as in Judges 2, 18 through 19, we see kind of where this story begins and some of the problems arise. Whenever the Lord raised up a judge for them, he was with the judge and saved them out of the hands of their enemies as long as the judge lived. For the Lord relented because of their groaning under those who oppressed and afflicted them. But when the judge died, the people returned to the ways even more corrupt than those of their ancestors, following other gods and serving and worshiping them. They refused to give up their evil practices and stubborn ways. Israel was constantly derailed in their efforts for the Lord, and much of that was because of the countries around them. Remember, God set Israel apart. Israel, were to be an example to everybody else. And they were unique. They did things differently. And they were to be that example to the world. And yet, time and time again, the world influenced them. And instead of Israel changing for the Lord and being a tool for the Lord, they would get derailed and they would fall short of that. Many of us know the story of Moses, right? Moses gets the 10 Commandments. While he's getting the 10 Commandments, he's up on Mount Sinai. What's happening with Israel? They're getting distracted. I mean, good grief. These guys have just gotten out of Egypt. They have seen the plagues. They have seen God save them. They have seen God wipe out one of the world powers of the time. Moses goes up on the mountain for several days, and in the meantime, hey, Aaron, can you make us a God that we can worship, the God that delivered us from Egypt? Oh, God, I do not know how he puts up with us. But it took him days to get distracted. It took him days to make a golden calf and fall away. After seeing everything they had seen, they were distracted. In Judges 8, we see that Israel, this is a first acknowledgement of they want to be like everyone else. So remember, in the time of the judges, they didn't have a king. They didn't really have a leader. They had God as their king, and the judge would be a champion and a spokesperson to Israel from God. But God was their king. But they didn't want that. Judges 8, 22 through 23. The Israelites said to Gideon, the judge at the time, "Rule over us, you, your son, and your grandson, because you have saved us from the hand of Midian," who was oppressing them at the time. But God told them, "I will not rule over you, nor will my son rule over you. The Lord will rule over you." You see, Israel is going to continually bring up this thing. We want a king. We want a king. This is the very first acknowledgement of that. And this is early in the story, but you're going to see time and time again as you go through this, Israel keeps wanting a king. Why? Well, they want to be like everyone else. Every other nation has a king. We want a king. Well, God's your king. And they're going to fight on this, and they're going to consistently rebel till God eventually gives them a king. Let's see how that goes. 1 Samuel 8, 6 through 8, Samuel is the last judge, and Israel is talking to them and saying, "We want a king. We want a king." Verse 6, but when they said, "Give us a king to lead us," this displeased Samuel. So he prayed to the Lord, and the Lord told him, "Listen to all that the people are saying to you. It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king, as they have done from the day I brought them out of Egypt until this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are doing to you." Time and time again, Israel rejects God and has the negative influences around them change them instead of Israel living for the Lord. Is that what happens in our own lives, guys? Is that what happens when we leave this church? When we step across that threshold, do we let the world change us? Or are we changing the world? So we see Israel is not exactly the greatest of examples of how to do this. Can anyone tell me any ideas of a good example of who we should listen to or follow that might have had an effect on their community? Not rhetorical. We're in church. There's a 5-letter word that's always the answer. Jesus! There we go. Good job. So let's look at Jesus and his disciples. Did he have an effect on the community that he was in? Well, Matthew 4:25 mentions large crowds from Galilee and Decapolis, Jerusalem, Judea, and the regions across the Jordan followed him. So, basically, others followed Jesus. Okay, not a very important verse, but let's talk about this for just a second. So, in their culture, was the ancient Israel culture like America? No. So did they have a Whataburger that they could just go and have food at? No. Were they well-sustained and capable of not working days, weeks at a time, and be able to live and function well? No. A lot of their work and daily toil was literally for the day, maybe the next day or a couple of days, but for them to be able to leave for a prolonged period of time like we do when we go on a vacation, that wasn't something that was very possible for them. Not only that, but it had to be really important if they were willing to leave things behind, leave their everyday life just to come and see what's going on. If you've been going through in our expository class, we've been reading and talking about some different things. I know a couple of weeks ago I covered on how there were all these rumors about after we're in Luke 9, John the Baptist is already beheaded, but Herod's like, well, did he come back to life? What's going on? Because people are still preaching the exact same message and people are coming back to life, and you see a lot of confusion in that time. But it's interesting enough, there are things that are happening that people are willing to give up their daily lives just to see, just to explore what is going on. What is going on? Jesus is healing the sick. He's casting out demons. He's performing miracles. And everywhere Jesus goes, change is happening. We know that not only because of what we read of what Jesus has done, and you can go through the Gospels and you will find evidence of everything that I just said, but you can also see by what others are doing or reacting to his effect. Matthew 4:18 through 22. As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw 2 brothers, Simon called Peter and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you out to fish for people. At once, they left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw 2 other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing the nets. Jesus called to them, and immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. We see that Jesus had such an impact that, at least here with these 4 disciples, that they immediately leave their jobs, leave their dad, leave their families, and they follow him. That's crazy. I mean, it's bad enough for the first 2 brothers when they left. Maybe they could come back to a job. But do you think the sons of Zebedee, do you think that they have any leg to stand on? They left their dad, who's the guy that runs the business, alone. Do you think dad's going to just hire them back after that? No, they sealed their fate, man. They in the doghouse for a while. Jesus had such an impact that whatever the consequences were, people were willing to deal with that and leave and pursue Christ. We see that Jesus had a huge impact on his community. Now, Jesus is usually the standard And we are not capable of being like Jesus perfectly, right? So what about for average Joe and Jane like you and me? What hope do we have? Well, Mark 3, 7 through 8 gives us a little bit of an insight. Jesus withdrew with his disciples to a lake, and a large crowd, getting ahead of myself, let me go back. So again, we see people are willing to leave, and we get this in multiple texts, which is why Mark 3, 7 through 8, you're going to see basically the exact same thing. Jesus withdrew with his disciples to the lake, and a large crowd from Galilee followed. When they heard about all he was doing, many people came to him from Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, and the regions across the Jordan around Tyre and Sidon. We see others followed him and came to see him. They left their lives behind to just check him out. Multiple times we get that, again, historically, contextually. This is a big deal. People are literally willing to leave their lives behind just to hear and see this Jesus of Nazareth. So how do we, or what are we supposed to do? Luke 10:1. After this, the Lord appointed 72 others and sent them 2 by 2 ahead of him to every town and place where he was about to go. So we see in a couple of different texts, we see that Jesus is going to go out. He's doing these things. While he's in the middle of his ministry, he will send out the 12 disciples. And the 12 disciples will go out and follow and be and perform the same miracles and have the same effect as Jesus in the community. But then we also see this one of Jesus appoints 72. I mentioned this because, well, even if you include the 12 disciples, that means there are at least 60 Joes and Janes in that group, like you and me, who were sent to go and have an effect on our community. We see that Jesus empowered his disciples to go out and share his message, to go out and have an effect on the community. Don't make me bust out the book of Acts on us, because we know that Christ calls us to have an effect on our community. We are not to sit and wait and do nothing. We are to have an effect. We are to go out, share Jesus, share what he's done for us, share what he has done, share the goodness, the love, the gentleness, the truth, the kindness, the grace, the mercy, all of that. We are to go and share. We're not to sit and wait in our chair and be like, okay, come talk to me. We're not to just wait for someone across that threshold of our church and say, oh, come talk to us. We are called to go and do. So how do we have an effect on our community? So as a pastor here, I see a lot of people that come in with needs. I've been here for 10 years. I know a chunk of our history. I wanted to let you know the effect that Solid Rock Church has on this community. Solid Rock Church, and this is, again, limited to my 10 years because I can personally testify to everything that's about to be spoken about. So Healing Waters is birthed through someone from Solid Rock, and Healing Waters is a ministry for veterans who have seen military tours and are having a hard time adjusting back to everyday life. And Mike Schlimgen uses fishing as a method to help transition and help soldiers get back to everyday life and process what they've gone through and having a healing effect on them. We've heard from Teen Challenge not too long ago, which is a drug rehab program for people, not just teens, but teens, adults, about getting over drugs. And it's the best program that I've ever seen with a ridiculous success rate. It's in like the 80%, which the next closest one's in like the 19 percentile. Teen Challenge, which focuses on drug rehab and replacing drugs with Christ. Fellowship of Christian Athletes, which I've worked with for about 5 or 6 years now, and I've partnered with, even though I was homeschooled and I knew nothing about this in my growing up. FCA has had an effect on thousands of people across this nation since, again, the 1950s. And today we see Pat Ford and his wife Kim, who manage Texas State. Their focus is introducing college athletes and coaches at Texas State, which if you don't know is not exactly easy, and it's not exactly the best fertile ground, if you know what I'm saying. Well, I have these moments. I'm not as good as you, but I have some moments. So FCA is something that we have partnered with over these last 10 years. We've supported Hill Country School, which is a Christian school that is an alternative to the public school out here, so that people can go to school and hear about Christ. We've partnered with Strong Tower for Orphans, Salvation Army. We've partnered with missionaries like John Price with World of Bible Ministries. We support locally True Choice, which is an abortion alternative to people who are going through that hard decision in life. We've supported Hays County Food Bank. This church over the last 10 years has helped with 3 founding churches as they've been getting established out here and starting. This church has provided a space for them to meet, get to know people, get a footing, and then go out and move from there. We've partnered with dozens of churches and ministries over these last 10 years to help others know about Christ, whether it's through youth events like United Weekend. It's been with other church-going meetings, like when we have the citywide prayer meeting that we do once a year. Time and time again, this church has partnered with other churches like that, other ministries. Some of you know the Fishers of Men fraternity, which started out as a Solid Rock ministry that is now its own independent ministry focused on men leading other men to Christ and being able to live that life out well and to be a fisher of men. We see with the Walk to Emmaus, which we just had a meeting. We had 2 meetings for Walk to Emmaus this last week here at this church, which is just a wonderful retreat that helps people get to know Christ better. And I can't say more because you just have to go to understand the impact that that has. Rattler Fellowship, which was a program both at Miller right here and Goodnight, and before classes would start every Tuesday, about 5 different churches split out, would meet up, have a little club time with about 100 kids, and we'd play games, we'd give them donuts, and we'd give them Jesus, and we'd talk to them about Jesus in school. Last year, this church gave away almost $40,000 in ministry support and benevolence needs. Some of you have been here for 10 years. Some of you have been here for about 30 minutes. Well, I guess a little bit longer now. But you've had an impact on this community through those, whether through giving. Maybe some of you have partnered with some of those ministries. Maybe some of you have donated food, donated your time, efforts, energy. In some way, you have had an effect in what I've mentioned. I want to say thank you. Because as a foreigner to San Marcos, I've been here 10 years. It's awesome to see what this church has done. Because I always see that there needs to be more. Because there's a lot to be done out here. But when you look at a church of our size, we punch above our pay grade, y'all. And that's awesome, and I thank you for that. I thank you that you have had an impact. I thank you that you do have an effect on your community. Now, I can't tell you how the community sees you or me, but we do all know people in our community, right, that you just know. How many of you guys know the 10-minute sticker station guy right there by Texas Roadhouse? How many of you guys get your inspection on over there? I thought so. So, we all know the guy, right? You walk on in. After you've been there twice, he knows you and your car. He'll never ask you again which one's yours. You just walk in, you sit down, and you just wait. Because he always knows who's next, regardless of how many people are there. He just seems to know, yep, no, that person came in after that one, and it's there. When it's about to be your turn, you get your keys out, and you just get them ready. He walks by, gives you a look, puts his hand out, you give him the keys. 10 minutes, you're done. He's a character that we all know if you've been there, like I said, if you've been there once or twice, you know this guy. And he's been out in this community for a long time. And that's just a person that we know. And we all have a view on that. And if you know the guy I'm talking about, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you don't, well, you don't. How does this community respond or look at you? Is this where the change really happens? Is this really the last step? Well, if you know that I've already told you this is a series, this is only halfway, so we've got another half to go. So I'll stop there for today in that. And next week we'll talk about, because there's another step. Before we can change our country, before we can change our community, there's another step that needs to be done. But I want you to think about a few of these things. Number one, are you changing the world around you? Or is the world changing you? What are you doing in your community? As an SRC member or as an individual? What are you known for in this community? Are you known at all? I mean, I know I can confess I'm not the best at that. I like to be behind the scenes. I don't like being seen. I don't like being heard. If in a perfect world, I would not be a pastor, or at least until I became one. My goal in life is that you will remember what was said and what was done by me, but I don't want you to remember me. I want you to remember Jesus. And I love it because at least half of you have done it. When someone quotes me back to me, it's like, I don't remember who said this, but someone said this, and that was really good. I'm like, thank you. You don't remember me, you remember what was said because that was Jesus. That's my goal. But just because that's what I want doesn't mean that's what I'm supposed to do, is it, Morgan? Recently, I started walking my neighborhood, and for years, I've lived in the same place now. I did not know anyone, and no one knew me. And I started walking, and it doesn't take me too long, and now I know almost, not everyone, but I know a bunch of neighbors now on my street. They're like, yeah, you're that weird white guy that walks around my neighborhood. And I know these people through just random interactions because I'm out in my community doing that. What are you doing? So as you go out this week, we're about to go to a prayer time, but I want to encourage you. You've had an effect on this community one way or another, and thank you for that. My question to you is, what are you supposed to do now? Because sometimes in our community, we rest on our laurels, we take a break, we're like, I've done plenty. Well, I'm a firm believer that until you get to go home, you've got a mission to do. What's your mission right now? And I would encourage you as we go into a prayer time to talk to God about that. God, what do you want me to do right now? What effect do you want me to be having? Who's the community you want me to be reaching out to? What is it you have for me that I can do? Because when we are following in God and it might be extra time, it might be extra effort, it might cost more. But when you're doing and following in the way God has for you, that's where you're living your best. We're here for a reason. And you can sit on the sideline and do nothing, or you can get in the game and at least have some fun in the meantime. Because nothing is like it when you're out there on that field of life doing what your coach, God, is telling you to do. And so in this prayer time, we're going to have some people available. And sometimes we do this, and today I know that there's a specific prayer need, and I don't have a lot of details. Everything I have, I'm about to share with you, but I know that Danny Pape, one of the gentlemen at this church, he had a seizure last night. And so that's about all I know. If you'd like to pray for Danny and his seizure, I'm going to have Rick, be here in the middle. If you would go and pray with Rick, if you want to pray for Danny and his seizure and for his family, go to Rick and would you please pray for him because he needs it. If you are feeling called to pray with anyone, you're not limited to your table. You can, by all means, go across the church. We'll have some people designated that if you want someone to specifically pray with you, these people are just willing to be there and pray with you. We've got Fred on over here, and so Fred always loves to pray with you. We've got Cody in the back. I've got George in the back as well. I've got two women, Maria and Jody, who are available. And if you're a woman and you would prefer to just pray with another woman, we've got several available today. I'll be over here on this side. And we're just available if you want prayer. I would strongly encourage you, if you're supposed to go pray for someone, go do it. You might not know them. They might be a little weird. Well, I know they are because they're here. We're all a little weird. But we're also all family, right? So even though as our family is weird, we love our family. So you can pray at your tables, whatever you want to do, but this is a time of prayer. In a second, Bolt will come on up and he'll dismiss us in a prayer. But in the meantime, let us give God our attention and see if he has anything for you or wants to just say something. And so afterward, we'll fellowship. And there you go. You go ahead and stand and let us go to the Lord in prayer.